Well, the rumours were swirling hard from early this morning. The PM was consulting his most trusted cabinet ministers. Diaries had been cleared. Interviews and ministerial trips cancelled. In Parliament, few could believe it. But Rishi Sunak fired the starting gun for the 4th of July just after 5 o'clock this afternoon in a dull, rainy and very noisy Downing Street. It was a case of things can only get wetter. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me. Why has he called it?
It's interesting, he didn't even talk about that in the statement. You'd expect an explanation, we didn't get one. I understand the stuff that's been discussed with his inner circle inside Number 10 is that the fiscal event that was planned for the autumn, maybe giving another tax cut, in order to boost the popularity of the Conservative Party, it was just looking like it wouldn't shape up. Even if you did have enough money for a national insurance cut, it wasn't clear that those were registering with the voters, but you might well not have enough money for that. So there wouldn't be that sort of boost. They were worried as well about small boats crossing the channel during the summer, which would point at a failure of his policy, even though he would say it was waiting for the impact of the planes. He was hoping he might get a plane going off during this campaign. So he'd hoped to have something in the coming weeks, which would help. He thought Reform Party weren't at their best. Maybe this was the right moment to make a move for an election, and tactical voting would probably just get worse. Anti-Tory tactical voting. By the way, this isn't a total surprise. There's been parallel planning going on for originally a May 2nd election and then a summer election on the side, but Rishi Sunak was leaning into the autumn, we thought. That was the sense of people who were having conversations with him. At the very last minute, he's shifted, and I'm told the very last minute, the button was, the hand was hovering over the button and then pulled back and then over the button again as early as this morning.
I mean, this morning, amid all the speculation, nobody could really believe it. How's it gone down with his MPs?
Badly. I haven't yet spoken to a Tory MP or texted one who's come back with a positive response. And I've asked for a few other Tory MPs what they're finding, and I still haven't found a positive response. There was a lot of shock to start with, but I can't find many of them, maybe because they bought into the arguments they thought were coming out of that building, that later would be better, who think this is a good idea. But it's an idea that's now in motion. For many, it's become a triggering sight. The podium's appearance today, though, meant not one Tory leader replacing another, but an early general election.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War.
He was drenched with rain. His voice competed with a pro-EU demonstrator playing Tony Blair's landslide anthem from the Downing Street gates.
Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. I hope that my work since I became Prime Minister shows that we have a plan and are prepared to take bold action necessary for our country to flourish. Now, I've stuck with that plan and always been honest with you about what is needed, even when that's been difficult. Because I'm guided by doing what is right for our country, not what is easy. Now, I can't say the same thing for the Labour Party, because I don't know what they offer. And in truth, I don't think you know either. And that's because they have no plan. There is no bold action. And as a result, the future can only be uncertain with them. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister. He has shown time and time again that he will take the easy way out and do anything to get power. If he was happy to abandon all the promises he made to become Labour leader once he got the job, how can you know that he won't do exactly the same thing if he were to become Prime Minister?
Many Tory MPs were in shock. They thought the promise to wait until the second half of the year to call an election meant he'd call it in the autumn. Instead, it'll be 2 days into the second half of the year. The Labour leader, speaking indoors, framed by Union Jacks, insisted he did have a plan and principles.
We have a long-term plan to rebuild Britain, a plan that is ready to go, fully costed and fully funded. But most importantly of all, we do all this with a new spirit of service, country first, party second. a rejection of the gesture politics you will see in this campaign, I have no doubt, from the Tories and the SNP.
In the election announced today, a reminder, Labour wants to take seats off two parties. A day that began with welcome economic news for the government.
Inflation fell to 2.3%. Inflation falls.
It is 2.3%.
Just after the news the government had been hoping for, a stressed Rishi Sunak emerged from Downing Street meetings. Some believe still unsure whether to press the button for an early election.
Today we reached a major milestone and inflation is back to normal.
As he spoke, David Cameron had set off for Albania. Arriving there, he apologised for having to turn back almost immediately, barely glimpsing a lavish welcome to attend a cabinet meeting. To kick off the early election, Rishi Sunak finally decided he had to call. As he eyes a July election, Rishi Sunak will be hoping voters give credit for low inflation, maybe even see an interest rate cut during the campaign. He'd like to see a plane take off for Rwanda before polling day. His team worried waiting for an autumn election could mean voters see a whole summer of small boat crossings. And plans for tax giveaways in an autumn mini-budget were looking more and more unrealistic. Earlier, there was a rare standing ovation for Tory MP Craig McKinley, back in the Commons after months away. Sepsis meant he had to have his arms and legs amputated. Like many who clapped him, he thought this Parliament had around 6 more months to go. Instead, it has days. After the losses of the local elections at the beginning of this month, many Tory MPs assumed, like so many prime ministers, with their backs to the wall, Rishi Sunak would hang on, hoping something would turn up. The King leaving Buckingham Palace tonight after granting the Prime Minister the dissolution of Parliament. Rishi Sunak's opponents will say going early proves he's not delivering. Rishi Sunak insists voters have seen enough to know what could be dashed from their hands without him.
Well, Labour may be riding high in the polls, but can they get the votes in the right places to secure a majority? How does the country stand now? Where are the key battlegrounds? Well, in the last election in 2019, many of the so-called red wall seats in Labour's heartlands turned blue. Labour will be keen to win back those seats from the Conservatives. Then there's the blue wall, Conservative strongholds in the south, where Labour and the Liberal Democrats will be vying to win new seats. In Scotland, Labour will be hoping to capitalise on waning support for the SNP. In Wales, because of boundary changes, 40 seats will be reduced to 32. The Conservatives will be looking to hold on to the big gains they made there in 2019. In Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin and the DUP are the joint largest parties. The DUP will need to find a new candidate, though, in Lagan Valley, as the incumbent Jeffrey Donaldson stood down after being charged with sexual offences, which he denies. So why an announcement now? Mr Sunak's mind could have been made up after today's encouraging inflation figures, showing the steepest fall for almost 3 years. He was in bullish mood this morning, calling it a major milestone for the UK economy. Our senior political correspondent Paul McNamara is in Stourbridge, the kind of bellwether seat which Labour needs to take to win the election. Paul.
Yes, this is a constituency that was created in 1997 and since then has only ever been held by the party in power. But if Labour want to win here, they have a mountain to climb. Stourbridge is number 206 on the Labour target list. The Tory majority here is 13,500. Now, in normal times, you are not turning that sort of majority around. These aren't normal times, though. I've been on the phone to Conservative MPs this afternoon with majorities of 15,000, 17,000. Tonight, they are nervous. Now, if Labour were to win here, you would be looking at a 1997-style Labour landslide. If the Conservatives want to win here, though, they need to hammer home that message, which they will do. Look at today's inflation figures. We have a plan. The plan is working. Change is dangerous. And we've been testing out that message today in the West Midlands and in Leeds. It would appear Rishi Sunak has some convincing to do.
Hello, who's on the phone? It's Nanny and
And we've got news for Nanny. There's an election coming, called by a Prime Minister who says his plan has got the economy back on track. But is Rishi Sunak's economic optimism matched by these parents, these voters in Leeds?
No, not at all. Quite the opposite. We've had to do quite a lot of cutbacks on on food, going out, eating out, just to save up money for bills and the mortgage.
Shopping bill has doubled. It's just everything's so hard at the minute. It's just it'd be nice for it to settle down a little bit and we can get back to normality.
It's a lot tighter, definitely a lot tighter in terms of what we can afford, and going on holidays. We're not doing things like that anymore, or just being a bit more careful what we can spend.
They may not be feeling it, but today Rishi Sunak finally had good news to deliver, news to launch an election with. Prices rose at 2.3% in the year to April. That's down from 3.2% the month before and way down from its 40-year high of 11% back in October 2022. The big driver, energy prices, 27% lower in April compared to 12 months before.
You must be over the moon.
No, I am at home, but for industry and for companies like ourselves, our energy bill here has gone up by over £800,000 since September because...
For just the year?
Just for 12 months, yeah.
Energy and inflation might be down in general, but it can take a while for that to filter through. For many businesses, like this chemical engineering plant in the West Midlands, prices are still on the up.
The rest of our input costs are still on the increase. And the challenging...
By more than 2.3%?
Oh, yeah. I mean, raw materials are still contain about a 5 to 7%, in some places a 10% price increase relative to where they were. But the converse is that our output prices are getting severe pressure to come down because everybody is saying, well, inflation's at 2.5 or 2.8, whatever that number is. So we're under huge pressure. But not only that, I think you have to remember that we're in a global market. So we're competing against Chinese, Indians, US, Europeans, who are getting subsidized energy, which means that if we try and recoup those costs that we've got, we're putting our prices up. They become unacceptable to our customer in that marketplace because they can get cheaper elsewhere.
Not only that, but Robinson Brothers' competitors are global, from China, India, where fuel is subsidised. The UK, they say, is not competitive. That's not the message the Prime Minister will be selling for the next 5 weeks. Inflation is down, a corner the government says has been turned.
And that is an important moment for our country, for the economy, and shows that our plan is working. Now, whilst I know people are only just starting to feel the benefits and there is more work to do, I hope this gives people confidence that if we stick to the plan, there are brighter days ahead.
This is just not the time for a victory lap and popping champagne corks, because this is about more than lines on a graph. It's about family finances. And the truth is, after 14 years of Conservative government, working families and pensioners are still worse off.
A brighter economic future is what both parties will be selling this election. It needs to be better than the recent past, says this manufacturer, but it's not guaranteed.
You don't think the government at the moment has an industrial strategy?
It doesn't have an industrial strategy. I think they're in a really, really difficult situation, the current government. And I think when the new government comes in...
If a new government comes in.
If the new government comes in, if the new government comes in, I think they're going to be holding a pretty difficult child as well.
On the economy, the Prime Minister says he's turned a corner for the nation. In 6 weeks, he'll find out if the nation's turned a corner from him.
Well, our economics reporter Neil MacDonald is with me here in Downing Street. So where is the key economic battlefield?
Well, this Parliament has been shaped by two genuinely historic economic events. The biggest burst of inflation we've seen for 40 years, and of course the biggest drop in national output for 3 centuries during the lockdown. But it's not just those two events, but it's also the two main policies that were adopted to tackle them, which the voters now get to cast their view on. Interest rates, a 16-year high to tackle inflation, and of course a very sharp increase in the tax burden to deal with the borrowing that came out of helping people during the pandemic and with their energy bills.
But they will be banging on about inflation back to normal.
Yes, of course. And look, I mean, the inflation rate today is the lowest level for 3 years. It's lower right now than France and Germany, which has not always been the case in recent months. But 2.3%, economists had hoped the figure would come down even more than that. A lot of them suspect that there is still underlying inflationary pressures out there, and they think it makes it less likely that the Bank of England will cut interest rates in June. So, if the inflationary tide is ebbing out, one of the questions is, what are we left with? And I just wanted to show you the figures. Well, since the last election, the overall consumer prices have gone up by 23%. For food, it's even more than that. They've actually gone up by 30%. So I think one big issue will be, do voters think about the latest inflation figures, or do they think about the inflation figures for the last 4 years?
And the big question is, will any of the main parties tell the truth about tax?
Yeah, and I wanted to show you a graph because I suspect we'll be seeing it quite a lot during this election. So this is the Office for Budget Responsibility showing taxes as a share of national income heading to their highest level since 1948. Can we do something about that? Should we do something about that? And there's another issue that's the flip side to this, of course. Taxes pay for public services. Conservative and Labour both committed apparently to very, very tight public spending plans. I think the question they're going to be asked a lot is, are those spending plans at all deliverable when one of them forms the next government?
Thanks, Neil. Well, joining me now from the House of Commons is the senior Conservative MP, Sir Charles Walker, who is stepping down at this election. Thanks for joining us. A lot of your colleagues are very upset about this, think it's a terrible idea. What do you think?
So look, the Prime Minister picks the date, and he's picked July the 5th because he thinks this is a good window to go in. And I fought 6 general elections, and once the starting gun is fired, personal enmities within your own party, ideas of what should be done within your own party are set aside, and you go into campaign and fight mode. So I think once people leave this place today and tomorrow, get back to their constituencies, it'll be nose to the grindstone for all candidates, Labour, Conservative, SNP and the Lib Dems and so on.
But the assumption was that if you're 20 points behind in the polls, it would be suicidal to call an election. Why is that a wrong assumption?
So look, I'm not a strategist within Number 10 or Central Office, CCHQ, but I imagine they see that lead, they believe, and they've polled that lead is a soft lead. That actually once Rishi Sunak starts setting out what he's done for the country to get us back on an even keel and what he's going to do in the future, and runs the line, this is no time for a novice, it's a dangerous world. There's stuff going on in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe. This is no time for a novice. We don't know what's going to happen in America. So I suspect there will be an element of Project Fear as well. They think that they can chip away at this, and more than chip away, significantly reduce this current lead.
I mean, no time for a novice was a thing Gordon Brown said when his leadership was under threat. It's hard to argue that Keir Starmer is a novice, isn't it? I think the polling sort of suggests that that's the one line that doesn't work against him.
Well, so look, I mean, it may not be as nakedly put as that, but Rishi Sunak will say, I've been the Chancellor and Prime Minister for over 4 years. I've guided this country through choppy waters back to calmer waters. Stick with the captain now so I can get you to port. Look, Christian, it may or may not work, but that is going to be the campaign. It's also fact that a campaign is 6 weeks and it is grueling. It is really hard work. And Rishi will also be banking, the Prime Minister, that he's give or take 20 years younger than Keir Starmer, and he'll have more stamina to make it over the line. Look, I know no more about this than you do, but this is where I suspect the direction of travel will be and the thinking will be in Number 10 and CCHQ.
Yeah, but how confident would you be if you were actually running again?
So, look, if I was running again, I would be fighting the campaign and getting out there and trusting CCHQ to come up with messages, provide me with the ammunition that gives me the best chance of returning as a Conservative Member of Parliament. Rishi Sunak hasn't called a general election for July the 4th because he thinks he's going to lose it. He's called it for July the 4th because he thinks this is the best window and opportunity for him to win it. You know, politicians don't think about losing elections. Prime Ministers don't think about losing elections. It's within their DNA to win.
Well, I mean, you say that, but I mean, people are also speculating about whether he's just accepting that sort of losing is baked in now. The longer he hangs on, it just kind of annoys voters, and he probably fancies a quicker exit to California.
But that's the wonderful thing, isn't it, about politics, is everybody speculates and everybody has a point of view. I know Rishi Sunak. I don't know him well, but I've spent some time in his company. And he is an extremely competitive young man and will be going in to this general election to win it. It is a 6-week campaign. It is a grueling campaign. There is no hiding place in a general election campaign for the half-hearted.
Charles Walker, thank you very much for joining us. Now let's go to our lead studio and Kathy.
Thanks, Krish. So what do we know about how people could vote? Well, let's take a look at the latest poll of polls compiled by politics website Politico. This works out the average of polls carried out by companies across Britain. Here's Labour, currently on 44% of the vote share, according to the latest analysis. And here are the Conservatives, 21 points behind on 23%. In third place, it's Reform UK with 12%. They only have one MP, Lee Anderson, in Ashfield, but they're also expected to target constituencies like Barnsley North, a new seat created by changes to constituency boundaries. The Liberal Democrats are currently polling fourth with 10%. They have 15 MPs and will be looking to defend marginals like Edinburgh West, but will also be going for seats like Conservative-held Wimbledon. Next come the Greens, polling at 6%. They'll be looking to retain their only seat in the Commons, Brighton Pavilion, and will also be fighting hard to win in places like Bristol Central. Polling sixth UK-wide is the SNP on just 2%. But, of course, they only stand in Scotland, and there they're behind Labour on 29%, according to a recent YouGov poll. The SNP have 43 seats to defend and might have an eye on winning others from the Conservatives. But politicians are fond of saying the only poll that matters is on election day. So a lot could change in the next 6 weeks. Well, if the announcement came as a surprise to most Conservative MPs, the Labour Party certainly wasn't expecting to go to the polls in July either. I'm joined now from the Houses of Parliament by the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. Jonathan Reynolds, so you were taken by surprise, I assume, and you're now scrambling to get your manifesto together.
Well, I think there was a view amongst some of us, I was one of them, that we might see the general election in May, and obviously we were on the wrong side of that one. I have felt for a while the Prime Minister himself probably didn't even have a real strategy in place as to when it would be, but it is fair to say it has caught a few people out here in Parliament today, but of course it is what we want in the Labour Party. We know this government has failed, we know the country needs change, and we know Labour can be that change because of how we've changed ourselves since the last election. So it's exciting, right. It's an opportunity, and it's a big responsibility.
OK, so you've got your manifesto oven ready, to coin a phrase. You haven't really given us much of a clue what's in it yet, except Keir Starmer keeps on promising change. You've said it again there. But are you really going to be bold enough to actually promise change during the election campaign so we know what we're in for?
Yes, I think we are setting out, and already have set out, different policies, a different direction for the country. But we know people will say, and do say to us, look, there's so much to tackle when it comes to the future of the UK. How are you going to make a dent into that? How are you going to make a difference? And that is why Keir set out our first 6 steps last week: economic stability, a new border security to tackle illegal immigration, 40,000 new NHS procedures a week. We have switching on GB Energy, a new state-owned energy company, getting people energy bills down for the long term, tackling antisocial behaviour, 6,500 new teachers. I think these are specific things that would make a difference. So there's a little bit of noise here in Central Lobby.
It's pretty vague stuff, isn't it? I mean, the Tories wouldn't disagree with tackling antisocial behaviour. And on the economy and on immigration, you're fairly similar, really, aren't you?
No, I
it's
don't
going to
think
be a
that's
Ming
true.
vase strategy, isn't it?
Look,
just gradually, carefully carrying this vase over the threshold of number 10, not frightening the horses.
Look, I respectfully disagree, because I think if you look, so you mentioned there illegal immigration. The Rwanda policy the government has is a gimmick. It will not make a difference. We completely reject it. We'll spend the money on something better, real law enforcement, real measures to make a difference. That's a substantial difference between the political parties. And I could go through each area and give you those examples.
The Border Force Command, which was the thing that was pledged in the pledge card, nothing to do with Rwanda in that pledge card, that is very, very similar to what the Conservatives are already doing.
Well, you see, because we're not proceeding with Rwanda, because we reject it, we have a huge, significant resource there. I mean, Rwanda's already cost £500 million, so it's a significant additional resource we can put into that instead. And just on the point, because I know this will come up a lot in the campaign, of whether it's a steady-as-you-go campaign from Labour, whether we're not doing what's required on that message of change. Look, British politics does not work by your side going up just because the other side has gone down. Labour has had to change. Labour's had to recognise, under Keir Starmer, where we were in 2019 was a position the British public rejected. And look at the scale
that's about
of
changing
that
your
change.
party, not the country.
Well, you can't change the country unless you can get control of your party and change it for the better and put it back in the service of the British people, and that is what
this
Keir
is going to be a
has
radical change we're looking at if you get into government.
Are we going to put forward a manifesto, not just for change, but for national renewal, for a different kind of politics, public service, sorting out problems for the long term, not short-term gimmicks like we see time and time again? And look, those 6 first steps we put forward last week, they are the first steps. There's a bigger programme, of course, that sits behind that, but we want to be able to tell people there's a difference that can be made.
Right, well, I look forward to seeing the details of that programme and questioning you on it. And you say you're excited, and you appear excited. Are you also, be honest, a tiny bit nervous about the scale of the challenges you might face if you get over the steps to number 10?
It's about responsibility. We take the responsibility
Are you nervous, though?
Seriously. It's not a nervousness about the scale of the challenge, because we know how big that challenge will be. But what it is, to be genuinely honest, is having been here as a Member of Parliament for 14 years now, having seen, it's an honour to be a Member of Parliament in any circumstances, but having seen the impact of Conservative government in that time, having seen how badly the country is today, as opposed to when the Conservatives came to power, I'm nervous about this country missing the chance to change direction. I want the chance to have a different future for the UK, for my constituency, for the whole country, and that is what this election will give the British people, and it's their choice. Not a single vote has been cast yet.
Just finally, on that point about nerves, I mean, Sir Keir Starmer has admitted openly that he's worried about the impact that being in number 10 might have on his young family, his 2 teenage children, for example. Do you think he is worried about how much his life might be about to change in a matter of weeks?
I think anyone who has the potential to become Prime Minister of this country should take that seriously, and Keir is someone who takes all public service seriously. He's been a public servant all his life. He didn't need to come into politics. He's come into it to serve. And yes, the burden, the personal burden of even being leader of the opposition is a significant one. But I know Keir Starmer. He's my friend as well as my party leader. I know his dedication to this job and to this country. And that is why I know he will be, if he gets the chance to be, a great Prime Minister.
Jonathan Reynolds, thanks very much for joining us. Back to you, Krish, in London.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, we are live in Edinburgh, where Scotland's First Minister John Swinney was setting out his priorities for government earlier today, and in Cardiff, where our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis has been testing the mood in Wales. But first, let's go to our Scotland correspondent and Catherine Sampson. Catherine.
Yes, Christian, priorities rather shifted through the course of this afternoon. It has, of course, been a fairly exhausting month in Scottish politics, a sense of denial, perhaps, of some of the parties as rumours of this election swirled around. Scotland will be a key battleground in this election. The SNP, of course, now facing their first general election since Nicola Sturgeon stood down as leader last year. Now, she led them from win to win. Back in 2019, they secured 48 seats, some polls already suggesting they could be on course to lose more than half of those. Why? Well, the party is grappling with a range of issues. Of course, there is this ongoing police investigation into party finances, and they're also facing now a Labour Party who feel confident. They feel they're making a comeback in their former heartlands. Now, John Swinney only recently took over from Humza Yousaf as SNP leader. After the Prime Minister's announcement, I caught up with him at Holyrood. John Swinney, you've only been in the job for just over a fortnight. Are you ready for this election, and what does a good result look like for the SNP?
First of all, I'm very pleased that we have an election date. I'm looking forward enormously to leading my party into this election campaign. I set forward for the party leadership knowing that we'd have a Westminster election soon. It's a wee bit sooner than I think everybody thought, but it's welcome. It's a welcome opportunity to remove the Tory government and to put Scotland first. The party's in a really good state to fight the election because it's got good, clear, popular leadership. And that's going to be our strength in this election campaign. We've also got our candidates in place in every part of the country, and we've got a really powerful message that Scotland is protected by the SNP.
Just wonder, could you sum up your strategy for achieving another independence referendum in one sentence?
Well, what I want to make sure we do is we build the support for independence so that people understand one simple thing. You'll never get independence unless you vote SNP. That'll be right at the heart of the SNP election campaign.
Now, it's interesting because perhaps key to how this battle will play out in Scotland is who can win the hearts and minds of so-called soft independence voters. They are the voters who back independence, have supported the SNP in the past, but might be persuaded this time round, with the prospect of another referendum further down the line, to lend their votes to Labour in the hope of ousting a Conservative government. As for the Scottish Conservatives, well, they have 6 seats in Scotland, largely centred around rural constituencies. They feel confident they can hold on to them by pushing the message that they are the main pro-union party. What will be interesting to see, though, is how significant independence is this time round when other issues, the cost of living crisis, the NHS, housing, are all competing against it.
Catherine, thanks very much. Well, let's go now to Andy Davies, who's in Cardiff. Andy.
Cathy, the new seat boundary changes are going to be felt particularly keenly in Wales because 40 Westminster constituencies will become 32 in this election. That's a huge change, really, and I think it's going to make it harder for people to predict the party's fortunes here. If we go back to 2019, the big story in Wales was that of the Tories taking those red wall seats in the north of Wales. Wrexham, for instance, had been in Labour hands since 1935. It was a hugely symbolic moment when the Tories took that seat. The big question is, can they hold on to those seats? And recent polling would suggest otherwise, with Labour looking confident of reasserting its remarkable electoral dominance in Wales. As for Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists, they'll be hoping that their decision to step away from their cooperation agreement with Welsh Labour here last week will help them position themselves as a distinct alternative to the two bigger parties.
Well, Andy, what about the problems that Labour's First Minister Vaughan Gething has been having recently?
It's an area of real vulnerability for Labour, I think. Vaughan Gething, that they're in government here, of course, and Vaughan Gething tonight has been talking about the prospect of 2 Labour governments in Britain later this year. But he's been beset by controversy since becoming First Minister. That decision of his to accept a £200,000 campaign donation from a company whose owner had previously been convicted of environmental offences has angered many, including within his own party, and is certainly going to be a talking point in this campaign. And the Tories are going to be targeting Labour in power here in general. It's a familiar theme. They've been picking up the pace recently, pointing to problems with the NHS here, economy and education, and saying that's what you get with Labour in government. Labour in government, of course, will be turning, the Welsh Labour government will be pointing the finger at Westminster and saying these public service failures, the bulk of the problems lie with the Tories in Westminster.
Andy, thanks very much. Back to you, Chris, in Westminster.
Thanks. Well, the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, has accused the Conservatives of being out of touch and out of time, claiming that people across the country were crying out for change. Joining me now from Westminster is Daisy Cooper, who's deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats. Now, the last time you did really well in a general election was 2010. That time, people voted for Clegg and they got Cameron. The truth is, this time, if you vote for Davey, you'll get Starmer. Are you going to be honest with people about that?
Look, there are millions of people across the country who still haven't decided how they're going to vote on the 4th of July. And Liberal Democrats are going to spend absolutely every single second, every minute of every single day campaigning for their votes. And we will not let up until 10 p.m. on polling day. So whatever happens after that will be, and we'll deal with that the day after. But between now and the 4th of July, we will not take a single vote for granted. And we're going after as many votes as we possibly can so we can unseat Conservatives right around the country.
But what is success?
Well, success for us would be growing, obviously, to elect more Liberal Democrat MPs. We're putting the NHS and social care front and centre of our campaigning, and we know that that is the #1 issue that comes up on the doorstep time and time and time again. We can hear that the Conservatives have driven our NHS into the ground. They have not helped people with the cost of living crisis. They failed to tackle the absolute environmental catastrophe of sewage in our rivers. And in around 80 seats around the country, it's the Liberal Democrats who are the clear challengers to the Conservatives. And in those seats, if people vote for the Liberal Democrats, they get a local champion and they can help kick this Conservative government out of power.
But again, the trouble with voting Liberal Democrat, though, is that if you end up with electoral power inside Parliament, you change your position on things. In 2010, you betrayed your voters over tuition fees. So people are going to go into this election knowing whatever you say now, it might get junked after the election in order to do a deal for power.
I can be absolutely clear with you and voters all around the country that a vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote to fix our NHS and social care. It's a vote to tackle the cost of living crisis, which is a huge problem for families right around the country, and it's a vote to clear up our rivers. That's what people will be voting for a Liberal Democrat in this general election.
But isn't the truth that the choice is simple at this election? It's Starmer or Sunak. And if you want change, you should go the whole hog. And if you don't want change, then you stick with the Tories.
No, that's not right. I mean, it's very, very clear that the country is crying out for change. But as I say, in around 80 seats around the country, it's the Liberal Democrats who are the key challengers to the Conservatives. And it's only by voting for the Liberal Democrats that you can kick out those Conservative MPs. We're ready to play our part in kicking out the Conservatives out of power and to get rid of this failing Conservative government for good, because quite frankly, people are sick to the back teeth of our NHS being driven into the ground and for being taken for granted. So we're campaigning in those 80 seats, and we really hope that we can win over the trust and support of many voters in those areas.
Is your manifesto written? When are we going to see it?
Well, I don't quite know when it's going to be published, but we've done a huge amount of work. What I can tell you is that we've got leaflets that are ready to go tomorrow.
Right, but have you agreed on your policy platform? Is it all settled, or have you still got to now go into a panicked, what are we going to say about X?
There's no panic here. As I say, we're putting NHS and social care front and centre of our campaigning. We're focusing on the cost of living and cleaning up the scandal in our rivers. We've got lots of policies on lots of different areas, and our manifesto will be published in due course. But as I say, we've got leaflets that are ready to go tomorrow.
Still not quite clear on what the answer is. Are you saying there are still things to be decided, or has everything been worked out? It's just a question of it going to the printers.
Well, let's be clear. The manifesto will be published in due course. We didn't know the election was going to be called today, just like the rest of the country didn't know that the election was going to be called today. Our manifesto is very, very advanced, but of course people are going to want to do a few last-minute checks and cross some T's and dot some I's. But fundamentally, as I say, it's the NHS and social care that we're putting front and centre of our campaign. We've already talked for many months now about improving access to GPs, about improving access to dentists, about solving the crisis in social care. We have a whole raft of policies that we've been talking about for months and months and months. So it won't be a surprise to some people to see some of that, we hope, reflected in the manifesto once it's published.